Okay, what if I told you that today we're going to solve a murder? And I'm not talking about just any old cold case. This one's been sitting on the books for, get this, 1.8 million years. This is the story of one of our very first human ancestors, and it's a total mystery. Why on earth did they all die so young? So the big question is, who, or maybe what, was the killer? Let's dig in and follow the clues.
So let's set the scene. We're in Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania. It's 1960, and the sun is just beating down. A young man named Jonathan Leakey is out there digging with his parents, the legendary paleoanthropologists Lewis and Mary Leakey.
He's digging, and then, funk. His hands hit something hard. He carefully pulls it from the earth, and it's a lower jawbone. It's ancient, obviously, but incredibly, it still has 13 teeth in place. After a little more digging, they find bits of a skull and 21 tiny bones from a hand and wrist. They knew, right then and there, this was something huge.
But see, these weren't just any old fossils. As scientists were about to find out, these bones were the very first clues in a much bigger story. A story of struggle, survival, and, ultimately, extinction. They were the key to unlocking our species' first cold case.
So, like any good detective, we're going to follow the evidence. Let's start the investigation and see what these first few clues told us about our victim.
First things first, the team used a really cool technique called potassium argon dating to establish a time of death. And the result was just staggering, 1.8 million years ago. I mean, just try to wrap your head around that. It's like a crime scene was left completely untouched for almost 2 million years before the first investigator ever showed up.
So the initial forensic report started to paint a picture. The teeth and the wrist bones showed this individual was only about 11 or 12 years old when they died. A kid, really. Their brain was around 650 cubic centimeters. Bigger than a chimpanzee's, sure, but still only half the size of ours today. And those hand bones, they showed a precision grip, perfect for making tools. That ability earned it a name, Homo habilis, the handyman, the very first member of our own genus, Homo. Okay, so that's one skeleton, but here's where the mystery really deepens. As more and more Homo habilis fossils were discovered over the years, a really disturbing pattern started to take shape. Almost all of them were young. This wasn't just a single tragedy. Something was systematically wiping out our ancestors before they even had a chance to grow up. It was time for a much deeper investigation.
By the time we hit the 2000s, the case file was getting seriously thick. Scientists had the remains of over 24 different individuals, and that was a game changer. It meant they could go from looking at just one victim to profiling an entire population.
A team of specialists basically became tooth detectives. They used these incredible forensic techniques to pinpoint the exact age of death for every single one. They measured how much the tooth enamel had worn down, they analyzed these microscopic scratches left behind from a lifetime of chewing, and then they checked all that data against other ancient human records. It's an unbelievably precise way to read someone's life story from just their teeth. And what they found? Well, it was chilling. It was unlike anything scientists had ever seen in the long, long story of human evolution. The truth was actually way worse than anyone had imagined. The average age of death for the entire Homo habilis species was just 12.8 years. Let that sink in. The vast, vast majority of them never even became teenagers. Out of all the skeletons they have ever found, only a single one had lived to be 25 years old. Just one. And here's the real kicker. Not a single Homo habilis fossil has ever been found that reached the age of 30. 0. This wasn't just a tough life. This was an entire species living on a razor's edge, almost as if they were doomed to die young. A death rate that high isn't just bad luck. It's an evolutionary crisis. So to figure out why they died, we have to understand how they lived. We need to build a profile of our victim here. What was it about Homo habilis that made them so incredibly vulnerable? Well, it turns out Homo habilis had what you might call a critical design flaw. They were completely stuck between two worlds. Their feet didn't have that springy arch we have, which meant they couldn't run very far or very fast, but at the same time, their shoulders and hands weren't built for climbing trees efficiently anymore. They were pretty bad on the ground and pretty bad in the trees. Masters of nothing. And on top of that, they made this really dangerous evolutionary trade-off.
To feed that bigger, super energy-hungry brain, their bodies actually got smaller. They were weaker than their own ancestors. They had this bigger brain, but it wasn't quite smart enough yet to do complex planning or sophisticated hunting. It was just this huge energy drain without the full survival payoff. All right, so let's recap. We have a small, kind of slow, not very strong creature with a big, hungry brain. Now let's take a look at the neighborhood they lived in. The prime suspect in this whole cold case, it wasn't just one thing. It was everything. If you think the African savanna is a dangerous place today, I'm telling you, it is a walk in the park compared to the Pleistocene era. Today, you've got maybe 6 major apex predators to worry about. Back then, there were at least 15, and they were all basically supersized. I mean, let's just look at this rogues gallery of suspects. You had giant hyenas that could crush bone like it was a potato chip. There was a saber-toothed cat called Dinofelis that actually specialized in killing primates by puncturing their skulls. The Mossbach lion, a 500-kilogram monster that hunted in huge prides. And if you thought, hey, I'll run to the water to be safe. Nope. You'd be greeted by an 8-meter-long crocodile. For Homo habilis, there was literally nowhere to hide. So a flawed ancestor, living in a world of monsters. The odds were just impossibly stacked against them. So what's the final ruling in the cold case of Homo habilis? What was their ultimate fate? Well, around 1.9 million years ago, a new player entered the game. Homo erectus. These guys were taller, they were smarter, they were way better runners, and they were more advanced toolmakers. For a couple 100,000 years, these two species actually lived side by side. But you know, in the game of evolution, there's usually not enough room for two. A competition was pretty much inevitable. And so, the verdict is in. Homo habilis was simply outcompeted, replaced. They weren't really murdered by a monster, but by a better version of themselves. They were an evolutionary dead end, but they were a profoundly important one. Because their story didn't just end there. Their desperate struggle to survive against these impossible odds, that's what forced the development of cooperation, of communication, the very foundations of our societies. Those simple stone tools they made, that was the first spark of technology. And that big, inefficient brain, that was the spark that would eventually catch fire and become our own intelligence. Their struggle is, quite literally, our origin story. You know, they lived in a world filled with actual, real-life monsters. And their fight to survive, even though they failed, paved the way for us, for humanity, to eventually win. It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? Our ancestors had their monsters to face. What are ours?